September 30th, Ouagadougou, Burkina Faso. The morning sun rose over a nation that was holding its breath. The air in the capital city was thick, not just with the red dust of the Sahel, but with a palpable sense of tension that had been building for months, perhaps even years. For a generation, this land in the heart of West Africa had been weathering a relentless storm. It was not merely a storm of wind and sand, but a storm of instability, of deepening security challenges, and of crushing economic hardship that left fathers worrying about their harvests and mothers worrying about their children. The people were tired. They were exhausted from promises that never materialized, and from a feeling of helplessness that seemed to stretch on without end. They were looking for a signal, any signal that the cycle of despair could finally be broken. And then, amidst the uncertainty and the confusion of that September morning, a new figure emerged from the shadows of history. He was not a career politician with a polished smile and a rehearsed speech meant to charm foreign diplomats. He was not a wealthy member of the elite stepping out of an air-conditioned luxury car in a tailored Italian suit. He was a 34-year-old captain in military fatigues. His uniform was worn from use. His face was covered in the dust of the region, and his eyes carried a quiet, almost reluctant intensity. His name was Ibrahim Traoré. And at that exact moment, amidst the roar of engines and the shouts of the crowd, he became the youngest head of state in the world. Usually, when leadership changes in such a dramatic fashion, the international community reacts with immediate skepticism and concern. Analysts in major capitals across the globe looked at his age. They looked at his rank. They saw a man who had spent his life on the front lines, not in boardrooms. They asked if he was ready. They asked if a young man with no political experience could possibly steer a country through such violent turbulence. But on the streets of Burkina Faso, the reaction was entirely different. Thousands of young people poured into the squares of the capital. They were waving flags, climbing on monuments, and cheering. They were not cheering for chaos. They were cheering for recognition. For the first time in a generation, they saw a leader who looked like them. They saw a man who didn't speak down to them from a high podium. They saw a man who had walked in their shoes, who understood the hunger in their stomachs, and who spoke their language. It was a moment of profound connection, a realization that leadership did not have to look distant and unreachable. But who is Ibrahim Traoré really? Is he just a soldier who seized a moment of opportunity, or is he something more? To truly understand the man, we must look beyond the sensational headlines. We must look past the military uniform and the red beret that has become his signature. Because before he was a captain, before he was a president, he was something else entirely. Something that defines his unique style of leadership today. He was a geologist. He spent his university years studying the earth. He learned about the soil composition, the water tables, and the precious minerals hidden deep beneath the surface. This background is not just a footnote in his biography. It is crucial to understanding his vision. A geologist looks at a piece of land and sees its potential. Where others see only dry dust and poverty, a geologist sees what could be. He sees the gold, the zinc, the manganese, and the fertility waiting to be unlocked. To many, geology sounds like a boring science, but to Traoré, it was a way of seeing the truth. While politicians looked at economic charts and foreign aid reports, he looked at the ground itself. When Traoré took office, he didn't bring the mindset of a politician focused on winning the next election. He brought the mindset of a scientist focused on solving a structural problem. He looked at his nation, a country immensely rich in natural resources, but paradoxically poor in infrastructure, and he asked a fundamental question. Why is a land so wealthy and potential facing such difficulty in reality? His mission, as he saw it, was not to blame the past or point fingers at the complexities of history. His mission was to engineer a better future, to take the potential of the soil and turn it into tangible prosperity for the people living on it. This is not a story about conflict or revenge. This is a story about self-reliance. It is the story of a generation deciding that the waiting is over, that the solutions to their problems will not come from the outside, but must be built from within, using their own hands and their own resources. This narrative we are about to explore is not just a biography of one man. It is the story of a shift in consciousness. It is about a people reclaiming their narrative, rewriting their destiny, and standing tall in a world that often expects them to kneel. From the classrooms of Bondokuy to the presidential office, Ibrahim Traoré's journey is a testament to one powerful idea: that dignity is not given by others. It is built, and it starts with the soil. To find the true roots of this story, we must leave the noise and the political intrigue of the capital city. We must travel nearly 250 kilometers west to a landscape that defines the heart of the nation. We go to a small, dusty town called Bondokuy. It was here in 1988 that Ibrahim Traoré was born. If you had walked into a classroom in Bondokuy in the late 90s and asked the teachers to point out the child who would one day lead the nation, it is very unlikely that anyone would have pointed at Ibrahim. He was not the loud kid in the front row, raising his hand for attention or commanding the room with charisma. He was the quiet boy in the back. Former classmates and teachers describe him as painfully shy, a student who preferred to observe rather than to speak. But behind that silence lay a terrifying intelligence. He was the kind of student who absorbed everything, who processed information deeply. And when he finally did speak, his words carried a weight that made adults stop and listen. There is a beautiful and significant detail about his upbringing that often gets lost in the headlines, but it is absolutely crucial to understanding his character and his vision for national unity. Traoré was born into a Muslim family, yet he received a significant part of his primary education in schools run by the Catholic Church. In a world where the media often thrives on stories of division painting, different faiths as inevitable enemies, Traoré's life stands as living proof of African unity. He grew up learning that faith, whether practiced in a mosque or a church, is ultimately about discipline, morality, and service to the community. This unique upbringing forged a man who does not see tribes and who does not see religious divisions. Where others see a Muslim or a Christian, he sees only a Burkinabe. He sees a brother and a sister sharing the same destiny. As he grew older, Traoré did not dream of wearing a uniform. He did not dream of war or command. He dreamed of the earth. He was fascinated by the land itself. This passion led him to the University of Ouagadougou, where he chose to study geology. For years, he immersed himself in the sciences. He studied the rock formations, the mineral deposits, and the intricate layers of the soil. He was an exceptional student, graduating with honors. At that point in his life, his path seemed clear and comfortable. With a degree in geology in a resource-rich country, he could have easily secured a lucrative job with an international mining company. He could have worn a suit, worked in an air-conditioned office, and lived a life of comfort and safety far removed from the struggles of the rural poor. But in 2009, Ibrahim Traoré made a decision that shocked his friends and confused his family. He put down his geology books. He turned his back on the corporate career that was waiting for him. And he picked up a military uniform. He joined the army. While what makes a man of science choose the life of a soldier? It was not a thirst for adventure. It was a sense of duty derived from his understanding of the land. Traore realized a painful truth that haunted him. What is the point of being a geologist, of studying the wealth of the land, if the land itself is in danger? He saw that security was the foundation of everything. Without a secure nation, there could be no mining, no agriculture, and no development. He realized that before he could help build the country's economy, he had to help secure its existence. He joined the National Academy of Officers, and just like in the classroom in Bondokuy, he didn't try to be the loudest cadet. He tried to be the best. His instructors recall a young officer who was disciplined, serious, and obsessed with strategy, while other young officers used their connections to seek comfortable desk positions in the capital. Lieutenant Traoré did the opposite. He asked for the assignment that everyone else feared. He asked to be sent to the north. The north was the most difficult region. It was the area facing the most severe security challenges. It was a place where the infrastructure was crumbling and the heat was unforgiving. He didn't ask to go there for glory or medals. He went there because that was where the people were suffering the most. He went there because he believed that a leader belongs where the problems are not where the comfort is. And it was there in the heat and the dust of the front line that the quiet scholar began his true transformation. He was about to witness realities that would shatter his heart and harden his resolve. The geologist was leaving the classroom, and the commander was stepping onto the stage of history. By 2019, Captain Ibrahim Traoré was no longer studying rocks in a university lab. He was living in the dirt of the Sahel. He was deployed to the north and the east of Burkina Faso regions that had become the epicenter of a crisis. This was the front line. But for Traoré and his men, the greatest challenge wasn't just the harsh environment or the mobile nature of the security threats. The real enemy was the silence. Imagine being a commander responsible for the lives of 100 men. These are young men you have trained yourself. You know their families. You know their dreams. You look into their eyes every morning and promise them that you will lead them through the fire and bring them home. But how can a leader keep that promise when the logistical support collapses? The reports from the front lines during those years paint a picture of heartbreaking difficulty. While the administrative machinery in the capital city of Ouagadougou continued to turn slowly disconnected from the urgency of the war, Captain Traoré's unit was facing a reality of extreme scarcity. There were days when soldiers, the very defenders of the nation, had to hunt for food in the bush just to survive. There were moments when supply trucks critical for ammunition and medicine simply never arrived due to bureaucratic delays or negligence. Traoré watched as the morale of his unit was tested to the breaking point. He saw his friends and colleagues fall in battle. Not because they lacked courage, they were some of the bravest men on the continent. They fell because in critical moments the support they needed was absent. They died because when they radioed for aerial support, the skies remained empty. They died because when they needed medical evacuation, the resources were unavailable. For a man of Traoré's character, disciplined, logical, and deeply loyal, this was unacceptable. He saw this not just as a tragedy, but as a systemic failure of leadership. He realized that the government at the time, led by Lieutenant Colonel Paul-Henri Damiba, had lost touch with the reality on the ground. The strategy was failing. The country was losing control of nearly 40% of its territory. Villages were being emptied, and the social fabric of the nation was tearing apart. The quiet scholar began to feel a profound sense of responsibility shifting inside him. It wasn't a desire for power, it was a desire for functionality. He tried to speak up. He tried to follow the proper chain of command. He traveled to the capital to demand better equipment for his boys. He pleaded for resources not for himself, but for the survival of the state. But his pleas fell on deaf ears. He was viewed as a nuisance, a young officer who didn't understand the complexities of politics. He was told to return to his post and wait. But you cannot tell a man who watches his brothers die to simply wait. In late September 2022, a devastating event occurred in Gasquinde. A massive convoy carrying supplies to a besieged town was ambushed. Dozens of soldiers were lost. Civilians were harmed. The scale of the loss was staggering. For Traoré, this was the tipping point. He looked at the aftermath of the ambush. He looked at the inaction of his superiors. He realized that the current leadership was paralyzed. If he did nothing, if he continued to follow orders from a broken system, Burkina Faso would cease to exist as a sovereign nation. It would be wiped off the map by the encroaching instability. He faced a terrible, agonizing choice. He could stay loyal to a failing hierarchy and watch his country collapse. Or he could intervene to save the people, risking his life and his reputation in the process. It is the hardest choice a soldier can ever make. On the night of September 29, 2022, Captain Ibrahim Traoré gathered his most loyal men. These were the Special Forces units who had suffered alongside him in the mud and the heat. They didn't move because they were paid to. They didn't move for fame. They moved because they were desperate for a solution. They moved towards the capital not to conquer, but to reset the course of the nation. When the sun rose on September 30th, the world would wake up to a new leader. But as Traoré climbed onto that armored personnel carrier, he wasn't thinking about the presidency. He wasn't thinking about titles or palaces. He was thinking about the boys he had buried in the sand. He was thinking about the promise he made to protect them. The geologist had analyzed the situation and found the fault line. Now he was taking action to prevent the earthquake. The scholar had become the revolutionary. When a man seizes power in many parts of the world, there is usually a predictable script that follows. First, there is the promotion. A colonel becomes a general becomes a marshal. Next, there is the visible transformation of lifestyle. The dusty combat fatigues are replaced by expensive tailored suits and Swiss watches. Finally, there is the physical separation. The leader moves into a presidential palace, surrounds himself with luxury, and gradually forgets the people who put him there. The world watched closely, expecting Ibrahim Traoré to follow this same old script. Critics and observers waited for the signs of excess. They waited for him to secure a comfortable retirement fund or to purchase property abroad. But Ibrahim Traoré did something that confused his detractors and electrified his people. He took that script and he burned it. Shortly after assuming the role of head of state, government officials approached him with the standard administrative protocols regarding his compensation. The presidential salary package was substantial. It was a fortune compared to what an average soldier earns. It was enough money to guarantee a life of ease for him and his family for generations. Traoré looked at the contract, and he pushed it away. He announced to the nation a decision that would define his tenure. I will keep my salary as a captain. Let that sink in for a moment. He sits at the highest office in the land. He oversees the national treasury. He manages the country's vast mineral resources. Yet he chose to live on the modest paycheck of a mid-level military officer. Why? Because he understands a fundamental spiritual law of leadership. You cannot truly lead people if you separate yourself from their reality. He stated in simple terms that he could not accept a raise when his soldiers on the front line lacked proper boots. He could not live in luxury when schools in the villages had no roofs. This was not a publicity stunt designed for cameras. It was a lifestyle choice rooted in his upbringing in Bondokuy. He refused to move into the opulent presidential palace, a building that for many symbolized the excesses of previous regimes. Instead, he kept his headquarters simple and functional. He continued to wear his combat uniform, not as a costume, but as a constant reminder to himself and his cabinet that the work was not finished. The war was not over. He refused to promote himself to general. To this day, despite holding the supreme command, he is simply Captain Ibrahim. To the African American community and the global diaspora watching from across the ocean, this display of humility resonates on a deep frequency. It reminds them of the leaders they have revered in history, men who lived simply and served with a singular purpose. It brings back the concept of servant leadership. In a world often obsessed with material wealth as the only metric of success, Traoré is redefining what it means to be successful. He is showing that true excellence is not defined by what you own, but by what you are willing to sacrifice. True power is not about how much you can take from the state, but how much you can give back to the people. He drives the same armored vehicles as his men. He eats the same rations. When he speaks to the elders of the tribes, he bows his head in respect. When he speaks to the youth, he looks them in the eye as an equal. He is sending a powerful unspoken message to every politician on the continent. If the captain can live simply, then public service must be about service, not profit. By refusing the crown of wealth, he earned something far more valuable than a high salary. He earned the trust of the soil, and a leader who is trusted by his people is more powerful than any army equipped with the most expensive weapons. But humility alone cannot feed a nation. Traoré knew that to truly free his people from the cycle of dependency, he had to do more than just save money. He had to break the chains of hunger. He had to turn his attention from the barracks to the fields. He was about to start a revolution with a tractor. There is a saying often whispered in the markets and the villages of West Africa, a warning passed down from the days of Thomas Sankara: "He who feeds you controls you." For decades, despite this warning, Burkina Faso fell into a dangerous economic trap. It is a nation blessed with millions of hectares of fertile land, bathed in sunshine, and fed by seasonal rains. Yet if you walked into a bakery in Ouagadougou just a few years ago, the flour used to bake the bread likely came from Europe. The rice in the bowls of families likely came from Asia. It was a cruel paradox. A nation of farmers was waiting for boats to arrive at distant ports just to eat. They were dependent on the fluctuations of global markets, vulnerable to supply chain disruptions, and reliant on foreign aid organizations. Ibrahim Traoré understood that a soldier can defend the borders with a gun, but only a farmer can defend the future. He recognized that true independence isn't just about having a seat at the United Nations or changing the color of the flag. It is about what is on your dinner plate. If you cannot feed yourself, you are not free. So he opened a new front in his war for sovereignty. But this time, the weapon of choice was not a Kalashnikov. It was a tractor. Traoré launched the Agricultural Entrepreneurship Initiative. It was a massive mobilization effort, unlike anything seen in recent history. He addressed the youth of the nation, the thousands of young men and women often found idle in the cities, and he gave them a new mission. Go back to the land. The soil will not betray you. But he didn't just offer speeches and slogans. He offered machinery. The government procured hundreds of tractors, tons of fertilizers, and high-quality seeds. They distributed these resources to communities that had been neglected for years. They cleared vast areas of land that had been lying dormant. The goal was audacious and clear: food sovereignty. Traoré declared that Burkina Faso must stop begging for food. He set a target for the country to produce its own wheat, its own rice, and its own vegetables. He wanted to break the cycle of dependency. This vision is powerful because it breaks the mental chains that have held the continent back. For too long, many young Africans were taught to view farming as a sign of poverty, as backward, or as a punishment. They looked at the soil and saw only hard labor. Traoré is flipping the script. He is telling a new generation, we have the sun, we have the rain, we have the hands. We don't need charity, we need to work. And the people responded. Across the country, a green revolution is beginning to take root. Young university graduates are trading their business suits for overalls. They are seeing agriculture not as a burden, but as a patriotic duty. They are realizing that growing food is the most revolutionary act a person can do. There is a powerful image that circulated on social media showing Captain Traoré himself inspecting the fields. He wasn't standing on a red carpet. He was walking through the crops, touching the wheat, talking to the farmers not as a distant president, but as a fellow son of the soil. For the African American audience watching this, the message hits home with profound familiarity. It echoes the teachings of historical figures like Booker T. Washington and Elijah Muhammad, who preached that economic independence starts with owning the land and producing your own resources. Traoré is proving that dignity is edible. Freedom tastes like bread baked from your own wheat. By securing the food supply, he is doing something strategically brilliant. He is making his country sanction-proof. In a volatile world, diplomatic relations can sour. Borders can close, and accounts can be frozen. But if a people can feed themselves, they can never be truly conquered. Hunger is the enemy's greatest weapon, and Traoré is disarming it. He is building a fortress, but its walls are not made of concrete and barbed wire. They are made of corn and millet. But while the crops were growing green in the fields, another resource was calling for his attention. Something much shinier, much more valuable, and historically much more dangerous than wheat. Gold. For a century, the mineral wealth of the land had been flowing out, leaving little behind. Traoré decided it was time to change the rules of the game. Burkina Faso sits on a geological marvel. Underneath the red dust and the savanna grass lies a treasure that has driven empires mad for centuries. The land is crisscrossed with veins of pure gold. It is one of the top gold producers on the African continent. Every year, tons of this precious metal are pulled from the earth. But for decades, if you visited the villages right next to these massive industrial mines, you would see a heartbreaking scene. You would see children walking with no shoes. You would see clinics with no medicine. You would see schools with no desks. How is this possible? How can a people walk on gold but sleep in hunger? This is what economists call the resource curse. For years, the economic model was designed in a way that did not favor the local population. Multinational corporations would arrive with complex contracts and expensive machinery. They would extract the wealth loaded onto planes and fly it to vaults in Switzerland, Canada, or London. The holes were left in the ground, but the value was transferred overseas. When Ibrahim Traoré stepped into leadership, he didn't approach this problem merely as a soldier angry at the injustice. He approached it as a geologist. He looked at the supply chain. He analyzed the mining codes. He realized that the math simply did not add up. He stated clearly, "The gold of Burkina Faso must benefit the people of Burkina Faso first." He began a bold campaign to reclaim the mineral wealth of the nation. But he didn't do it by simply shutting everything down. He did it by changing the logic of the economy. He proposed a shift towards local value addition. Instead of simply selling raw ore to the global market at a discount, he asked a simple question. Why don't we refine it here? Why don't we build the industry here? This led to one of the most significant announcements of his presidency, the construction of the first national gold refinery. This is a game changer. For decades, African nations have been forced to export raw materials at a cheap price only to buy back finished goods at a high price. By building a refinery, Traore is implementing a strategy of vertical integration. He is saying that Burkina Faso will process its own gold. We will add the value here. We will keep the jobs here. And we will keep the profits here. This is the essence of economic sovereignty. It is a message that resonates deeply with the diaspora. It reminds us of the historic attempts to build black economic power, like Black Wall Street in Tulsa, where a community thrived by circulating wealth within itself. Traore is attempting to rebuild that kind of prosperity on a national scale. Critics in the international financial press were skeptical. They called it resource nationalism. They warned that investors would flee. But Traore stood firm. He reminded the world that Burkina Faso is open for business, but the terms of business have changed. We want partners, he said, not masters. The impact of this decision is already being felt. The revenue generated from better resource management is now being funneled directly into the Patriotic Support Fund. This fund is not a slush fund for politicians. It is transparent. It is buying equipment for the soldiers on the front line. It is buying seeds for the farmers. It is paving roads that have been dirt tracks for 50 years. For the first time in a long time, the Burkinabe people feel like they are the shareholders of their own country. Traore has proven that a leader doesn't need a PhD in economics to understand the economy. He just needs to have a conscience. He understands that every ounce of gold taken unfairly is a theft from future generations. He has secured the soil. He has secured the food. He has secured the gold. But there was one final piece of the puzzle, a piece that is more important than money guns or wheat. To truly win this war, to truly make his vision last beyond his own lifetime, he had to speak to the soul of the people. He had to send a message to the millions of brothers and sisters waiting across the ocean. There is an invisible thread that connects a dusty village in Burkina Faso to a neighborhood in Chicago. It connects the streets of Ouagadougou to the bustling avenues of London, Paris, and Atlanta. That thread is blood. That thread is history. And today, that thread is vibrating with a new frequency. For centuries, the narrative of Africa has been written by others. It was often a story of tragedy, of poverty, and of a people constantly waiting to be saved. But Ibrahim Traoré is writing a new chapter, and he is writing it with his head held high. He is sending a signal to the millions of African descendants scattered across the globe. Look at us. We are standing up. Traoré often speaks about the diaspora, the sons and daughters of Africa who live overseas. He knows that you are watching. He knows that when you see him speak, even if you do not understand the language, you feel something stirring in your chest. It is the feeling of dignity. When he stands before world leaders and speaks the truth without fear, he is not just speaking for the 20 million people of Burkina Faso. He is speaking for every black man and woman who has ever been silenced, who has ever been told they are less than, and who has ever felt the weight of systemic injustice. He is proving that a black leader does not need to compromise his soul to be respected. The name Burkina Faso translates to the land of upright men. For a long time, the weight of debt, conflict, and dependency tried to force these men to bend their knees. But today, under the command of the young captain, the men and women are remembering how to stand upright again. Traoré's message to you, the global family, is simple yet profound. We are fixing the house. We are sweeping the floor. We are planting the seeds. We are securing the gold. We are doing this so that one day when you look back at your motherland, you will not see a place of pity. You will see a place of power. He is fighting to build a reality that many have only seen in movies, a reality where African intelligence, African resources, and African courage combine to create a thriving civilization. Not a fantasy, but a reality built on rice, millet, gold, and discipline. The road ahead is dangerous. We must not be naive. The history of the continent tells us that those who try to change the system often face immense resistance. The shadows are long. There are those who wish to see this young captain fail to prove that Africa cannot govern itself. We remember names like Patrice Lumumba. We remember Thomas Sankara. But Ibrahim Traoré is not afraid of history. He has accepted his destiny. He sleeps on a soldier's cot, prepared for whatever the dawn may bring. He moves with the confidence of a man who knows that even if they cut down the tree, they cannot stop the spring from coming. The spark has already been lit. The fear is gone. So as you watch this story, do not just cheer for him as a spectator. Learn from him. Find your own Burkina Faso, whether it is your community, your business, or your family. Defend it with integrity. Feed it with your own labor. Own it with pride. Be an upright man. Be an upright woman. The captain has done his part. The rest is up to us. La patrie ou la mort, nous vaincrons, fatherland, or death we shall overcome.